Wendy stood in the soft glow of candlelight, her hands nervously smoothing the tablecloth for the fourth time. The baked salmon was getting cold, and the red wine had lost its chill. She glanced at the clock, 8:12 p.m. too. Hours since Alex said he'd be home. The dining room, once their favorite space, now echoed with silence. Every minute deepened the pit in her stomach, but still she clung to hope. Maybe traffic, maybe work ran late, maybe he'd walk in with flowers and an apology. She wore his favorite navy blue dress, the one he once said made her look like midnight elegance. But as the clock crept past 9, Wendy sank slowly into her chair, her heart wilting with every tick. Her phone buzzed. It was Laura. "Happy anniversary, sis. He better be spoiling you." Wendy's throat tightened. She typed, "Thanks, he's on his way," and hit send with trembling fingers. It was a lie, but less painful than telling the truth, that she was alone on the night meant to celebrate their vows. It was nearly midnight when the door finally opened. Wendy didn't rush to greet him. She just watched from the hallway as Alex walked in, barely looking her way. He didn't notice the untouched dinner or the candles now melted down to wax puddles. "Long day," he muttered, heading toward the bedroom. "Where were you?" she asked softly. He paused, avoiding her eyes. "Meeting ran late. Grabbed drinks with the guys after." His blazer dropped onto the couch, revealing a faint smudge of pink on his collar. Lipstick. Wendy stared at it, her breath catching in her throat. Her eyes moved slowly from the stain to his face. "You missed dinner," she whispered. "Was it tonight?" he asked, unbothered. "You forgot," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He shrugged. "It's just a date, Wendy. Don't be so dramatic." And with that, he disappeared into the bedroom, the door closing with a quiet finality that echoed louder than a slam. Wendy stood frozen in the hallway, surrounded by cold food and colder realization something sacred had died between them, and he didn't even notice. Wendy sat on a park bench with a scarf wrapped loosely around her neck, the air crisp and scented with the season's first bloom. Laura joined her with a hot cup of cocoa in each hand, her brow furrowed with concern before even a word was exchanged. "You're quieter than usual," she said, passing Wendy a cup. Wendy smiled faintly, taking the cup but not sipping. "It was our anniversary last night," she murmured. Laura paused, then tilted her head. "And?" Wendy exhaled, staring straight ahead. "He forgot, came home after midnight. Said he was out with the guys." Laura's lips parted slightly, a sharp breath caught in her throat. "Wendy, how long are you going to keep covering for him?" Wendy's voice trembled. "It's not covering. I just don't know what to do yet." The weight of years filled the silence between them. Laura reached out and touched Wendy's arm. "You don't have to figure it all out today. But promise me you won't let him keep hollowing you out like this." Later that night, Wendy sat curled on her couch, Laura's words echoing in her mind. She stared at the framed wedding photo on the wall, the one where Alex had his arm around her waist and his forehead rested against hers. That smile, that man, where did he go? Her phone buzzed again. Laura. "Still thinking about him?" Wendy sighed and typed always. She hit delete. Then typed again. "I feel like I'm holding on to a man who's already gone." This time she sent it. Seconds later, Laura replied, "Then maybe it's time to let him go too." Wendy closed her eyes. Letting go wasn't easy. Love wasn't a faucet you turned off. It leaked through the cracks, even when the pipe was broken. But something about Laura's voice in the park, the steady, calm strength, reminded her of herself once. The version of her that had dreams beyond marriage, that laughed out loud without fear of judgment. That woman still existed, maybe buried, maybe bruised. But she was still there, waiting. It was an ordinary morning. Wendy reached for Alex's phone absent-mindedly. It buzzed on her side of the bed, and he was still in the shower. A habit formed from years of shared routines. But the screen lit up with a message that stopped her heart. "Last night was everything. Still tasting you, babe. Let's do lunch." See, her hands trembled as she placed the phone back exactly where it was. She stared at it, the letters burned into her mind. See, Cynthia. The name meant nothing before, but now it felt carved into her bones. The sound of the shower stopped, and Alex's humming drifted out. She sat on the edge of the bed, her breathing shallow, her thoughts loud. When he emerged with a towel wrapped around his waist, Wendy stood. "Who's Cynthia?" she asked. Alex blinked, startled. What? Your phone lit up. I saw her message. A pause. A beat too long, then a smirk. Cynthia? She's a colleague. She jokes around a lot. It's just banter. Banter doesn't sound like that, Wendy said quietly, her eyes refusing to blink. Alex shrugged. Wendy, come on. Don't read into things. You know I've been stressed at work. Can't I have harmless conversations without being interrogated? You call that harmless? She asked, arms crossed. Look, I didn't cheat. If you want to believe every random text means something, maybe you're the one with issues. And just like that, the walls of reality shifted. The man she once trusted now stood before her with words like blades, deflecting truth with indifference. Wendy didn't speak again. She simply nodded, walked to the kitchen, and stood by the sink for several minutes. The ache in her chest didn't come from the betrayal. It came from the way he didn't care that it hurt her. Not even a flicker of remorse in his eyes. That was what broke her. Not the message. Not Cynthia. But the way Alex looked her in the face and chose denial over decency. The silence of the night wasn't new, but that evening it felt louder than usual. Wendy sat at her vanity, brushing her hair out of habit, though her eyes were glazed and hollow. The master bedroom, once a sanctuary, felt sterile now. She turned toward the bed, where Alex's side had remained untouched for 3 nights in a row. He had taken to the guest room, citing work calls, late-night reports, and needing his own space. Wendy hadn't argued. She didn't even ask him to return. But every time she passed the closed guest room door, it chipped away at her heart. There was a time he would have pulled her into bed, whispered silly jokes in the dark, held her hand until sleep took them both. Now, she fell asleep with the scent of lavender and loneliness. Her hand reached for his side instinctively some nights, only to find air. The sheets didn't even hold his scent anymore. One night, unable to sleep, she padded down the hallway and paused outside the guest room door. She could hear faint laughter. Alex was on a call. A woman's voice responded softly through the speaker. I miss you already, the woman said, followed by a low chuckle from Alex. Wendy's breath hitched. She didn't knock. She didn't cry. She turned around and walked back to her room like a ghost in her own home. Crawling under the cold sheets, she clutched her pillow tightly, the one he gave her for their 2nd anniversary. A tear slipped down her cheek, warm against her skin. Where did you go? She whispered to the darkness. But no one answered. No arms reached for her. No voice comforted her. She was alone, utterly, undeniably alone, with a husband just down the hall, yet galaxies away. Wendy stood by the kitchen counter the next morning, the bitter scent of burnt toast lingering in the air. She wasn't sure how the words would come out, but they'd been clinging to the edges of her tongue all night. When Alex walked in, casually scrolling through his phone, she decided not to wait another second. I want to ask you something, she said steadily. He looked up, eyebrow raised. Are you having an affair with Cynthia? The air between them thickened. Alex scoffed, setting his phone down. Again with this, he said, chuckling dryly. Wendy, are you seriously going to ruin our morning over paranoia? She didn't flinch. I need the truth. I deserve that much. He stepped closer, his tone hardening. You're being ridiculous. Cynthia is just someone I talk to. You've always been so insecure, always reading into things that aren't there. Her stomach twisted. I'm not insecure. I'm not blind either, she whispered. Alex picked up his keys, already disengaging from the conversation. You've always been dramatic. Maybe that's why we're so distant now. You never know how to let things go. Wendy blinked, stunned. You're blaming me? She asked, voice cracking. You checked out of this marriage long before I asked questions, Alex. He turned his back. You can believe what you want, he muttered, and walked out the door. It slammed behind him like a final word. Wendy stood in the stillness, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. There had been no apology, no confession, not even an ounce of care in his tone. He didn't deny it out of guilt, he denied it out of convenience. And for the first time in weeks, the ache inside her didn't come from sadness. It came from anger, quiet, simmering anger, the kind that builds foundations, not flames. Wendy wiped a tear from her cheek and whispered to herself, You're not crazy. You're not wrong, and you won't be silent anymore. It started with glimpses. Wendy first saw her near the building's parking lot, tall, slender, immaculately dressed in a cream blazer and red stilettos. The woman had paused by Alex's car, laughing into her phone. Something about the curve of her smile was unnerving. Days later, she saw her again in the elevator lobby. Their eyes met briefly. Cynthia's gaze was sharp, curious, lingering too long to be innocent. Wendy's chest tightened. This wasn't coincidence. She tried to rationalize it. Maybe she worked in the same building. Maybe she was visiting someone. But each time Wendy saw her, Cynthia was just close enough to notice, yet distant enough to avoid confrontation. One afternoon, as Wendy left a meeting early, she saw Cynthia step into Alex's car parked on the street outside. Wendy froze across the road unnoticed. Cynthia leaned in and kissed his cheek before slipping into the passenger seat. Her laughter echoed as they drove off together. That night, Wendy stared at her reflection, watching the tremble in her hands as she wiped off her makeup. 1,000 questions buzzed in her mind, but the biggest one screamed louder. Why does she look so confident? It wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about the boldness, the gall. Cynthia walked like someone who had already claimed what didn't belong to her. Wendy slumped into her vanity chair, the air in the room suddenly too heavy. Her phone buzzed. It was Alex, texting that he'd be working late again. No mention of where he was, no hint of guilt, just routine avoidance. Wendy didn't respond. Instead, she opened her gallery and scrolled through old pictures, beach vacations, anniversary selfies, his sleepy smile on Sunday mornings. Her throat tightened. The man in those photos felt like a stranger now. Or maybe she was the stranger, an outsider in her own life, her own marriage. As her gaze landed on a picture of their wedding day, Cynthia's smirk flashed in her mind. The woman wasn't just stealing her husband. She was stealing her place and smiling while doing it. Wendy had never been the suspicious type, but that night something compelled her to follow him. She told herself it wasn't to spy, it was to confirm what her heart already knew. She waited until Alex left, pretending to head to the office for a late meeting. Minutes later, she grabbed her keys, slipped into her car, and stayed far enough behind to remain unnoticed. Her fingers gripped the steering wheel as he made a turn into a quiet, upscale restaurant, one they hadn't been to since their 3rd anniversary. She parked across the street, her heart pounding like a drum. Through the wide glass windows, she spotted Alex at a table for 2. He wasn't alone. Cynthia sat across from him, dressed in a silky red blouse, sipping wine like it was the most natural thing in the world. They were laughing, carefree, intimate, far too comfortable. And then it happened. He reached across the table and brushed a strand of hair behind her ear before leaning in and kissing her softly. Wendy's world tilted. Her breath caught, and a wave of nausea swept over her. It was one thing to suspect. It was another to see. She didn't cry, not yet. She simply stared, every detail seared into her memory. The way Alex smiled at Cynthia, the way he hadn't smiled at her in months, the tenderness in his touch, the easiness of their moment. And all the while, Wendy sat across the street, invisible. A ghost. When Alex finally pulled away and laughed at something Cynthia said, Wendy knew this wasn't a fling. This was something more. She slowly backed out of the parking spot and drove away, tears blurring her vision as the realization sank in. He had already replaced her. Not just in the bed, but in his heart, in his time, in his world. In the worst part, he never even looked back. The next morning, Wendy opened a fresh leather-bound notebook and stared at the first blank page for several long minutes. Her pen hovered, reluctant at first, but eventually touched down with a tremble. This is not for him, this is for me. The words flowed slowly, unevenly, like opening a wound. She documented the night before, what she saw, how it felt, the way her stomach twisted when Alex kissed Cynthia in public without shame. Every detail mattered now. She was no longer just surviving the heartbreak, she was recording it. Not for revenge, but for clarity. Writing was her only space that didn't lie to her. Each line was a confession, a timestamp of truth. She wrote down the dates he came home late, the phrases he used to deflect blame, even the exact minute she felt him emotionally leave their marriage. There was power in the ink, a quiet reclaiming of control in a world where her voice had been silenced. Later that evening, Laura came over with wine and soft pastries. She curled up beside Wendy on the couch and gently asked, "You doing okay?" Wendy offered a small smile, holding up the journal. I started writing. It helps me breathe. Laura flipped through a few pages and exhaled. This is your story, Wen. Don't let him erase it. Wendy blinked back tears. I'm scared I've been making excuses for too long. Laura reached for her hand. Even if you did, you're not anymore. That's what matters. They sat in silence, sharing a quiet strength. Wendy looked around her home, once filled with love, now reduced to careful tolerances and cold routines. That night, as she lay in bed, she didn't cry. Instead, she opened the journal again and wrote in bold letters, "He taught me how to endure, but I will teach myself how to leave." Wendy stood in the lobby of a sleek office tower, her palms damp with nerves. She hadn't told Alex where she was going. She didn't need another confrontation. She told Laura, "It's just a consultation. Nothing serious." Yet her heart thudded against her ribs like she was about to commit a crime. The receptionist led her to a private office where Jordan, a calm, well-dressed lawyer with a kind smile, greeted her. "You must be Wendy. Please sit." She eased into the leather chair across from him. "I'm not here to file anything. I just have questions," she began. "That's perfectly okay," Jordan replied. "Let's talk." She explained what she'd seen, what she suspected, and what she feared. Jordan listened patiently, occasionally taking notes, but never interrupting. "I don't want to tear him down," she said finally. "I just don't want to drown in this anymore." Jordan leaned forward gently. "Then let's build you a lifeboat." He laid out options, divorce proceedings, asset separation, spousal protection, but Wendy's mind was still wrapped around the idea that she was even here. "Do you think he could fight dirty?" she asked quietly. Jordan didn't flinch. "If he's already emotionally detached and invested elsewhere, yes. That tends to happen." She nodded slowly. "I just never thought I'd be sitting in an office like this." Jordan gave her a soft, understanding look. "Most people don't, but you're here now. And that already makes you stronger than yesterday." Wendy left with a folder full of legal guides and more questions than answers. But for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel helpless. She walked back to her car with a new kind of ache, a purposeful one. This wasn't about winning. It was about surviving with her soul intact. And maybe, just maybe, rebuilding something better. The invitation came as a surprise. Alex said it casually over breakfast, stirring his coffee. "Dinner with my parents on Sunday. They want to see us." Wendy blinked. "Us?" he nodded. "Just be ready. It's important." She dressed carefully that night, simple but elegant, and even wore the perfume Alex once claimed reminded him of their honeymoon. But the moment they stepped into the restaurant's private dining room, Wendy felt her stomach drop. Cynthia was already seated at the table, wearing a slinky black dress, casually sipping wine beside Alex's mother. "Wendy," his mother greeted warmly. "So lovely to see you, and this must be Cynthia." Wendy stood frozen, eyes darting to Alex, who looked away. "I invited her as a guest. She's helping me with some work projects," he said dismissively. The meal that followed was excruciating. Cynthia was charming, overly familiar with Alex's family, dropping inside jokes and laughing too loud at his father's dry humor. Wendy sat in stiff silence, slowly dying inside. At one point, Cynthia reached across the table and brushed something off Alex's collar. "You're always messy when you're hungry," she teased. His mother chuckled lightly. Wendy clenched her fists beneath the tablecloth. "How long has Cynthia been working with you?" she asked, her voice sharp but composed. Alex didn't miss a beat. "A few months. Why?" "Because she knows a lot about your family for just a coworker," Wendy replied, her gaze locked on Cynthia. The woman smirked, unbothered. "When you spend time with someone, you pick things up." The remark hung heavy in the air. After dinner, as they walked to the car, Wendy finally exploded. "Was that your idea of humiliation? Bringing her there like she's part of the family?" Alex shrugged. "You overthink everything. My family likes her, maybe more than they ever liked you." The words hit harder than any slap. Wendy turned away, her voice hollow. "That was the last dinner I'll ever pretend to enjoy for your sake." Alex didn't follow her. He didn't call after her. He simply unlocked the car and got in. And Wendy stood alone in the parking lot, her heels digging into the gravel, trying to remember how she ever once called that man her home. It happened at the cafe near Wendy's office, a place she stopped by occasionally to breathe and escape her spiraling home life. She just picked up her coffee when she heard the unmistakable laughter, light, polished, and overly familiar. Turning, she spotted Cynthia seated at a corner table, her phone in hand and a glossy magazine beside her. Wendy would have walked away unnoticed if not for what Cynthia said loudly and clearly into her phone. "Well, soon I won't have to worry about hiding anymore. I'll be the next Mrs. Alex." Wendy froze. It wasn't just the content, it was the tone. Possessive, entitled, certain. Her pulse quickened. She didn't confront Cynthia. She didn't need to. She walked out calmly, coffee forgotten on the counter, her mind racing. Cynthia wasn't just a mistress anymore. She had become a woman making plans for a future that didn't rightfully belong to her, and Alex had given her the confidence to do so. That evening, Wendy sat on the living room floor with her journal open and her hands trembling. "She said she'll be the next Mrs. Alex," she wrote in bold, slanted ink. It wasn't speculation anymore. It was confirmation. When Alex came in hours later, reeking of cologne that wasn't hers, she looked up from her journal and asked without warning, "Are you planning to marry her?" He blinked, caught off guard. "What?" "Cynthia," she said, her tone calm but icy. "She's already rehearsing her new name." Alex chuckled nervously. "Don't be ridiculous. She exaggerates everything." "But you didn't deny it," Wendy whispered. Alex shifted uncomfortably, then looked away. "We're not even divorced yet. Why are we having this conversation?" She stood, walking past him. "Because you've already made decisions behind my back. I deserve to know how far you've gone." He said nothing, and for Wendy, his silence screamed the loudest. That night, as she lay in bed, she realized she was no longer the betrayed wife. She was the abandoned one being rewritten before the story had even ended. Alex brought home flowers the next day, bright red roses in a crystal vase, placed neatly on the dining table. Wendy stared at them like a warning flare. "What's this?" she asked, arms folded. "A peace offering," he said casually, loosening his tie. "I've been under pressure lately, and I know I've been distant. I just want us to get back on track." Her brow furrowed. "You mean, now that Cynthia's name is floating in public?" Alex sighed. "Wendy, I messed up. I know I did. But let's not destroy everything we've built over a misunderstanding." She laughed bitterly. "A misunderstanding is forgetting an anniversary. A months-long affair, that's premeditated betrayal." He moved closer, voice low. "She doesn't mean anything, okay? It was a distraction. You're my wife. Can't we just reset?" But Wendy had heard that word too many times, reset. As if their marriage were a screen he could power down and reboot. That night, Alex stayed in the master bedroom again. He kissed her cheek before bed and whispered, "Let's start fresh." Wendy didn't respond. She kept her eyes on the ceiling, her heart hollowed out by doubt. In the early hours of the morning, she woke up to find his side of the bed empty again. Curious, she padded down the hallway barefoot, following faint sounds. From the study came the murmur of Alex's voice, and Cynthia's name, spoken with a softness Wendy hadn't heard in months. "No, she bought it. Said she wants to try again," he laughed quietly. Wendy leaned against the wall, her body ice cold. So the flowers were never for her. They were for the show. She turned and walked back to the bedroom, her steps light, controlled. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply opened her journal again and wrote, "He thinks I'm a fool, but he forgets I've stopped playing his game." It was no longer about saving the marriage. It was about saving herself from it. The envelope was thick, ivory-colored, and stamped with the firm's seal. Wendy found it on the foyer table when she returned from the grocery store. At first, she thought it might be another document from the utility company or insurance. But when she opened it and saw her name, Wendy Adele Roberts, on the header beneath petition for dissolution of marriage, her knees almost gave out. No note, no explanation, just cold official ink. When Alex walked in moments later, whistling and tossing his keys, she held up the papers wordlessly. His expression didn't change. "You weren't going to tell me?" she asked. "I figured it was best to rip the Band-Aid off," he replied nonchalantly, reaching for a water bottle from the fridge. "It's not working, Wendy. We both know it." Her voice cracked. "So you couldn't even talk to me? After everything?" Alex leaned against the counter and took a sip of water. "You'll be fine. I'm sure Jordan already gave you some options. She blinked in disbelief. You knew I saw a lawyer? He shrugged. I asked around. You're not exactly subtle. Wendy clenched the papers, her hand trembling. You really think you get to leave me like this? After lying, cheating, humiliating me? Alex's tone turned cold. I'm doing what's necessary. Don't make it messy. Her throat burned, but her spine straightened. I won't make it messy, Alex. I'll make it final. He chuckled without warmth and walked away. Alone in the kitchen, Wendy took a deep breath and pulled out her phone. She called Jordan and said 3 words, her voice steady for the first time in weeks. Let's do this. She didn't know exactly where this road would lead, but she knew one thing for sure. She would no longer be the one left behind. The house was too quiet that night. Wendy walked from room to room like a ghost, fingers trailing over furniture that once held memories, now just dust and echoes. The signed divorce petition sat on the coffee table, mocking her with every glance. It wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the slow burial of every hope she had poured into it. The couch still carried the scent of him. The bedroom mirror still held the reflection of a woman she didn't recognize anymore. When she reached the bathroom and saw her face under the harsh overhead light, something inside her cracked. She dropped to the cold tile floor and let out a sob so deep, it sounded like it had been waiting years to be released. Her fingers clutched her nightgown as her body shook with every wave of pain. Why wasn't I enough? She whispered to the silence, voice raw. What did I do to deserve this? But there was no answer, only the sound of her own breathing between sobs. The hours passed like shadows. Wendy sat against the wall, knees to her chest, the tiled floor numbing her legs. She didn't reach for her phone. She didn't text Laura. She didn't write in the journal. For once, she allowed herself to completely fall apart. And somehow, in that complete unraveling, she found something unexpected, a sense of finality. The tears slowed, her breath evened out, and a thought formed, sharp and sudden. He doesn't get to define me anymore. Slowly she stood, wiped her face with trembling hands, and walked to her closet. She pulled out every dress that reminded her of anniversaries, date nights, apologies. She laid them out and stared at them. Then, one by one, she folded them into a box labeled Donate. As dawn crept in, her fingers brushed across the mirror again. This time, her reflection looked different. Fragile, yes, but alive. Somewhere deep inside the brokenness, Wendy felt something begin to stir. Not revenge, not hatred, but rebirth. Wendy didn't announce her departure. She simply rose early one Saturday, packed 2 suitcases, and stood silently at the front door with her keys in hand. Alex was still asleep. Cynthia had spent the night again, judging from the unfamiliar heels by the hallway rug. Wendy didn't even feel the sting anymore. The numbness had grown roots. She placed her house key on the entry table beneath the family portrait they never bothered to take down. The photo made her pause. In it, they were smiling, her arm looped through Alex's, his hand resting on her waist. It looked like love. It had been love once, but that version of them was long gone. With one last look around, Wendy opened the door and walked out, her heels clicking against the pavement like a quiet drum roll. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She wasn't abandoning a home. She was escaping a prison built on denial. Later that afternoon, Alex returned from a morning run and found the house oddly quiet. He called her name once, then again. No answer. He checked the bedroom. Empty. The closet, half cleared. He wandered into the kitchen, confused. On the counter was a note written in Wendy's handwriting. I chose peace. I hope one day you understand what that means. He read it twice, then crumpled it without expression. She'll be back, he muttered to himself, almost convincingly. Cynthia walked in minutes later in one of Wendy's old robes, yawning. What's with the mood? She asked, stretching. Alex poured himself a glass of water and shrugged. She left, packed her things, no drama. Cynthia's lips curled. Guess that makes us official now, doesn't it? He nodded, but something inside him didn't settle. The silence in the house was no longer peaceful. It was hollow. For Wendy, however, the air felt different as she sat in the back seat of Laura's car, suitcase beside her, eyes staring out at the road ahead. For the first time in years, it felt like the beginning of something. Laura's home was warm in ways Wendy hadn't realized she needed. Soft lights, the faint scent of cinnamon, the quilted throw draped over the couch like an invitation. Laura greeted her with open arms and eyes that didn't pity her, but respected her. "You didn't have to do all this," Wendy said as she stepped inside. Laura smiled. "Yes, I did. You've carried enough alone. Not anymore." Wendy placed her suitcase down slowly, unsure if she belonged anywhere anymore. But Laura didn't let the silence linger. She guided her to the kitchen, poured them both a cup of ginger tea, and said, "Tell me what you didn't write in the journal." Wendy stared at the cup, emotions rising. "I feel like I'm mourning someone who's still alive," she said softly. "And I feel ashamed for still missing him." Laura reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "That's not shame, Wendy. That's grief. And it's allowed. But don't let it chain you." That night, Wendy slept in a small guest room with light yellow walls and floral curtains. It wasn't luxurious, but it felt safe. She stared at the ceiling, breathing in the quiet. For once, the silence didn't feel punishing. It felt gentle, healing. The next morning, she joined Laura in the garden, where sunlight filtered through hibiscus leaves. "You were always the strong one, you know," Laura said as she trimmed a branch. Wendy scoffed. "Strong doesn't cry in bathrooms. Strong doesn't beg a man to see her." Laura shook her head. "Strong is the woman who walks away without burning the house down. Strong is the woman who survives betrayal without losing her heart." Wendy looked at her, tears glistening but not falling. "Then I guess I'm still becoming her." Laura smiled and handed her the clippers. "Then let's grow something new." And as Wendy knelt beside her, snipping dead leaves and planting fresh roots, it felt like more than a metaphor. It felt like a beginning worth living for. The old Wendy had always kept her hair neat shoulder length and easy to manage, just the way Alex liked it. But today, as she sat in the salon chair with her reflection staring back at her, Wendy was done living by someone else's preferences. "Cut it off," she told the stylist, her voice clear and unwavering. "All of it," the stylist paused. "You sure?" Wendy nodded. "Yes. I want something different, bold, free." She watched in silence as strands of her past fell to the floor, each snip symbolic of the pain she was shedding. When the transformation was complete, she barely recognized herself in the best way possible. Her new tapered cut framed her face like a crown. For the first time in a long while, she didn't see a broken woman in the mirror. She saw someone trying, really trying, to start again. After the salon, she stopped by a boutique and picked out 2 outfits that spoke to her newfound confidence. One a soft ivory jumpsuit, the other a deep plum dress that hugged her figure unapologetically. No more muted colors, no more hiding. That night, as she modeled the outfits for Laura, her friend gasped and placed a hand on her chest. "You look like someone who knows her worth," Laura whispered. Wendy twirled in front of the mirror and smiled. "I'm starting to believe I do." She also resumed her therapy sessions, ones she'd started years ago, but abandoned when Alex scoffed at the idea. Now, every visit with her therapist felt like another layer peeled away, another lie unlearned. "Healing doesn't mean forgetting," her therapist said. "It means choosing not to let the pain narrate the rest of your story." Wendy left the session lighter. She wasn't healed, but she was healing. And that difference was enough to keep her going. Jordan laid out the files carefully across the table, his brows knitted in concern. "I had my team run a check on those documents you mentioned. And Wendy, it's worse than we thought." She leaned forward, heart racing. "Tell me." He pointed to a highlighted section on one of the financial forms. "This is a shared business account created under both your names, but you never signed for it. Alex forged your signature." Wendy's breath caught. "Why would he?" Jordan looked her in the eye. "Because he used your name to take out loans. Risky ones. You've unknowingly been tied to a failed investment that cost hundreds of thousands." Wendy swallowed hard, bile rising in her throat. "That's fraud," Jordan nodded solemnly. "And if we play this right, it could change everything in court." Her hands shook as she traced her name on the page, seeing it twisted and abused. "He didn't just cheat on me," she whispered. "He used me, legally." They went through more papers, contracts, tax forms, forged signatures, all buried beneath layers of Alex's deceit. "He banked on your trust," Jordan said gently. "He thought you'd never look this deep." Wendy stood slowly, walking to the window. Outside, life moved on, cars, laughter, birds in the trees. But inside her, something shifted permanently. "I won't let him get away with it," she said firmly. "Not this time," Jordan nodded. "Then we'll build your case carefully. Not just for divorce, but for annulment. Based on fraud." Wendy turned to face him. "He thinks this is just about love. But this is betrayal on every level." Jordan handed her a fresh folder. "It's time to stop surviving and start fighting smart." And as she took the folder in her hands, Wendy knew this wasn't revenge, it was justice. Cold, clear, and long overdue. The laughter echoed from behind the thick glass walls of the rooftop lounge. Cynthia held up her champagne flute, toasting a crowd of friends, influencers, and two of Alex's business partners. "To new beginnings," she beamed, clinking glasses. She wore a white cocktail dress that shimmered under the city lights, her arm hooked around Alex's like a trophy. Wendy's absence had been reduced to a joke now, an afterthought. Cynthia made sure of that. She was holding him back, she declared to one of the guests. Now he can finally breathe. Alex nodded, distractedly checking his phone. Cynthia didn't notice the strain in his jaw, the flicker of discomfort. Her world was now curated, full of curated captions, polished filters, and a man she thought she'd won. Meanwhile, across the city, Wendy sat with Jordan and Laura at a quiet cafe, the folder of documents between them. "He proposed to her already?" Laura asked, shaking her head. "Barely weeks after filing." Wendy didn't blink. "It's fine. Let her wear the dress. I'll be the one wearing freedom." Jordan leaned forward. "We're nearly ready. Just one more signed statement, and I can file the annulment case." Wendy nodded, her tone steady. "Let them toast tonight. Let her think she won." Laura raised an eyebrow. "You don't sound angry anymore." Wendy sipped her tea slowly. "I'm not. I'm strategic now." Across town, Cynthia snapped a selfie with Alex, captioning it, "The future looks so bright." But little did she know, Wendy was no longer in her rearview mirror. She was in the courtroom hallway, pen in hand, ready to flip the entire script. Wendy stood in the middle of Laura's hallway, holding her phone to her ear, the soft hum of the dial tone filling the space like a heartbeat. "Hello," the voice answered. "Elite Limousine Services. How may we assist you?" Wendy's voice didn't waver. "I'd like to book a black stretch limousine. For next Friday, morning arrival. Courthouse drop-off." There was a pause. "Certainly, ma'am. Any special details?" Wendy's eyes glinted with calm defiance. "Yes, make sure it's immaculate. I want them to remember the arrival more than the departure." When she hung up, Laura looked up from the kitchen with narrowed eyes. "You're really doing this?" Wendy nodded. "I'm not going to yell. I'm not going to plead. I'm going to walk in like I already know the outcome." "Because I do," Laura grinned, proud. "Then make sure you wear something that says regret tastes like dust." They both laughed, but underneath the laughter was steel. That night, Wendy laid out a soft beige gown and a gold necklace she hadn't worn since her wedding reception. She didn't plan to wear it again, but it reminded her of the girl she used to be, the girl who gave everything. Now, she was dressing to bury that girl in dignity. She stared at her reflection and whispered, "This isn't just closure. It's a declaration." She picked up her journal and wrote her final entry before court. He gave her the proposal. "I'll give her the mirror." When Jordan called later to confirm everything was ready, the filings, the exhibits, the fraud evidence, she simply replied, "Thank you for believing me before I even believed in myself." Jordan's voice was warm. "You gave me no reason not to." Friday was coming, and Wendy wasn't coming to fight for love, she was coming to cancel the lie it had become. The courthouse steps were crowded with murmurs and flashing phones. Alex adjusted his cufflinks beside Cynthia, who wore a figure-hugging blazer and oversized sunglasses. "I thought we were doing this privately," she hissed, seeing the growing attention. Alex shrugged. "People talk. Let them." Cynthia smoothed her hair, trying to remain poised. Then came the unmistakable sound of tires rolling slow and smooth. A sleek black limousine glided up to the curb like it had arrived from a different world entirely. The crowd shifted, heads turned. Cynthia squinted, lowering her glasses. "What is this?" she whispered. Alex stepped forward, but stopped when the chauffeur opened the door. Out stepped Wendy, radiant in beige silk, heels clicking like a metronome of judgment. Her head held high, her expression unreadable. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Alex's heart slammed in his chest. "Wendy," he called, voice cracking with disbelief. She didn't look at him. She only gave a small nod to Jordan, who appeared beside her holding a briefcase. Cynthia's posture stiffened. "She looks like she's walking into a movie," she muttered. "No," Alex said quietly. "She looks like she's ending one." Wendy walked past them without a glance, her scent trailing like defiance. As they entered the courtroom, the buzz followed them. Even the judge looked up from his files as the tension bled into the air. Wendy took her seat, spine straight, calm like still water before a storm. Cynthia grabbed Alex's arm. "What does she know?" she whispered, panicked. Alex swallowed hard. "I don't know, but she didn't come here to cry." Wendy glanced back only once, locking eyes with him. It wasn't revenge in her gaze, it was resolution. And for the first time, Alex felt something unfamiliar. Fear. The courtroom quieted as the judge entered, his presence commanding order. Wendy sat still, her hands resting gently on the table beside Jordan. Across the aisle, Alex shifted in his seat, eyes flicking between Wendy and Cynthia, who was now visibly sweating beneath her blazer. Jordan leaned toward Wendy. "Everything's ready. Just follow my lead." She gave a single nod, never taking her eyes off the front. The judge cleared his throat. "We're here today to proceed with the divorce between Alexander Roberts and Wendy Adele Roberts." But before he could continue, Jordan stood. "Your Honor, we'd like to file a motion before we begin." The room tensed. "On what grounds?" the judge asked. Jordan opened a file and handed it to the clerk. "Fraudulent inducement of marriage, Your Honor. We are no longer pursuing divorce. We are filing for annulment." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Alex's face turned ashen. "What the hell is he talking about?" he hissed, turning to Cynthia. Wendy finally stood, her voice clear and steady. "I never signed the divorce papers because I discovered the marriage itself was built on manipulation and deception. And today, I'm not here to end something, I'm here to void it completely." The judge scanned the documents, his brow raised. "These are serious allegations," he said. Jordan nodded. "And we have evidence. Forged financial records, false signatures, misuse of her legal identity, all initiated before and during the early stages of their marriage." Wendy sat back down as the judge ordered a recess to review the motion. Alex buried his face in his hands. Cynthia slowly backed away, dread spreading across her face like ink. "And Wendy?" She reached into her bag, pulled out her journal, and calmly turned to a blank page. She wasn't writing pain anymore. She was recording power. The courtroom settled into silence again as the judge re-entered, expression unreadable. Wendy stood with poise, her hands folded lightly in front of her. "Before we proceed," the judge began, "Mrs. Roberts, I'd like clarification on your refusal to sign the initial divorce papers." Wendy stepped forward, her voice firm but calm. "Because I never consented to a divorce based on lies. I waited because I needed to be sure that what I felt wasn't paranoia, that what I saw wasn't coincidence." She glanced briefly at Alex, who avoided her gaze. "But now I have the truth. I didn't sign the papers because the marriage itself was never real. It was a setup, a convenience for him, a manipulation of my trust and identity." She turned back to the judge. "I choose annulment not out of spite, but because I won't continue carrying a title that was never given to me in honesty." Alex stood abruptly, face flushed. "Your Honor, this is nonsense. She's twisting everything to make me look like a monster." The judge raised a hand. "You will have your chance to respond. For now, sit." Cynthia leaned over to him, whispering harshly, "Why didn't you tell me she knew?" Alex whispered back, "Because I didn't think she'd do anything." On the stand, Jordan presented copies of bank statements, forged signatures, and a timeline of Alex's misconduct, evidence meticulously gathered, undeniable. The room shifted. Respect slowly bloomed in eyes that once saw Wendy as a silent wife. The judge looked down at the mountain of paperwork, and then back at Wendy. "It appears," he said, "that you did your due diligence, Mrs. Roberts." She smiled faintly. "I had to. No one was going to protect me but me." That moment felt like vindication, not only in front of the court, but in the eyes of the version of herself who once stayed quiet. The sound of the gavel echoed like thunder. "Based on the preliminary review and submitted evidence, this court finds sufficient cause to proceed with the annulment request." A formal hearing will be scheduled immediately. Wendy's chest rose as she exhaled. It wasn't joy she felt, it was release. A gentle uncaging of the woman who'd been buried beneath years of gaslighting and betrayal. Alex turned to the judge, his voice cracking. Your Honor, please. This is my reputation. My business. Everything I've built. The judge cut him off. What you built, Mr. Roberts, appears to have been on the back of your wife's stolen trust and forged credentials. The court cannot uphold a contract entered under fraud. Cynthia gripped her purse tighter, inching toward the exit. The dream wedding she had planned in her mind evaporated with each word from the judge's mouth. Jordan leaned toward Wendy. You did it. This changes everything. Wendy gave him a slight nod. Now the world knows I wasn't the problem. As the bailiff handed Alex a formal summons for the annulment hearing, Wendy met his eyes. You thought I would fall apart, she said quietly, but you forgot who I was before you broke me. He didn't reply. There were no more excuses to give, no more lies to lean on. Cynthia finally stood and whispered, I'm not going down with you. She walked out, heels clicking in rushed defeat. Alex turned to follow her, but the bailiff blocked his path. Please remain seated until dismissed. Wendy didn't move. She watched it all unfold without a tremble, without a tear. She had already cried every tear this man deserved. And now all that was left was truth, and a woman who had finally learned how to use it. Outside the courtroom, Cynthia pushed through the crowd with urgency, her composure unraveling. This wasn't supposed to happen, she muttered, yanking off her heels to move faster. Reporters swarmed near the courthouse gates, curious about the high-profile annulment. Miss Cynthia, are you still engaged to Mr. Roberts? A voice called. She shoved past them, face flushed. She had imagined this day differently, photos in white, congratulatory headlines, champagne toasts. Instead, she was running, barefoot and humiliated. In the distance, Wendy emerged from the courthouse, flanked by Jordan and Laura. Calm, collected. Cameras clicked instantly, but Wendy didn't flinch. She didn't stop. She simply walked forward, chin lifted, eyes fixed ahead. The contrast between the two women was unmistakable, one fleeing shame, the other standing in strength. Inside the building, Alex sat alone on the bench, staring blankly at the floor. His lawyer muttered something about next steps, but he didn't respond. His mistress was gone. His wife no longer belonged to him. And the empire he built through deception was beginning to crumble. She walked in like she owned the world, he murmured, dazed. His lawyer replied, she walked in like she reclaimed what was stolen. At that moment, Wendy stepped into the sunlight, blinking slowly as if adjusting to a different kind of brightness. Reporters rushed forward, but she paused only once to give a soft, graceful smile. Not for them, for herself. And as Cynthia disappeared into a waiting taxi, head bowed in defeat, Wendy stood tall, proof that the one who leaves with dignity always wins more than the one who runs from the truth. The annulment was officially granted 3 weeks later, and though there was no parade or applause, Wendy felt the verdict like a cleansing rainfall. The courtroom was nearly empty that morning. No reporters, no Cynthia, just Alex slumped beside his lawyer and Wendy seated beside Jordan, her expression calm. The judge's final words sealed it. Based on overwhelming evidence of fraud and misconduct, the marriage is declared null and void. This court recognizes that the union, in the eyes of the law, never truly existed. Wendy closed her eyes briefly, letting those words land deep in her chest. Alex sat stiffly, jaw clenched, unable to meet her gaze. Jordan leaned over and whispered, It's done. You're free. And just like that, without a single raised voice or thrown insult, the weight of a decade was lifted. Outside the courtroom, Laura hugged her tightly. You didn't just walk away, Wendy. You walked through fire and never let the smoke touch your skin. Wendy smiled through the tears, threatening to fall, not out of grief this time, but relief. For the first time in a long time, she whispered, I feel like I'm standing on my own name. Jordan joined them with a final document in hand. Here's the certified annulment. You're no longer Mrs. Roberts. Wendy took it gently, staring at the line that used to define her. Good, she said, because that name never truly belonged to me. As they walked away from the courthouse, she didn't look back, not because she was ignoring the past, but because she was finally walking toward a future no longer tethered to it. The house was too quiet now. Alex sat in the living room, the blinds drawn, half-empty whiskey bottle on the table beside him. The TV was on, but he wasn't watching. The air felt stale, like a space abandoned even while occupied. Cynthia had moved her things out days earlier, sending only a text that read, "I'm not built for fallout." "Goodbye." He hadn't replied. He didn't know how. He scrolled through his phone contacts, stopping at Wendy's name more than once, fingers hovering, aching to dial, but knowing it was pointless. She wouldn't answer, and if she did, it wouldn't be the voice he once knew. He replayed everything she had said in court, every look she gave him, graceful, powerful, and unshakable. The memory of her walking past him without flinching haunted him more than any insult could. He stumbled into the bedroom and collapsed on the bed that used to hold warmth, now stiff with emptiness. The scent of Wendy had long faded, and the silence she left behind echoed louder than words. He remembered how she used to bring him tea when he worked late, how she used to touch his arm gently when he was upset. He had traded all of that for what? A fantasy? An ego trip? Now, even his business deals were stalling. Clients were backing out. Partners were distancing themselves quietly. His name no longer carried the weight it once did. And Wendy, she had left with dignity and taken the light with her. He pressed his face into the pillow and whispered into the darkness. "I didn't just lose her. I lost the only version of me that ever mattered." But there was no one left to hear him. The studio lights were bright but soft, casting a gentle glow on Wendy as she sat across from the interviewer, her posture graceful, her eyes steady. The show was a popular women's segment called She Rises, dedicated to spotlighting stories of strength and survival. "You don't have to share anything you're not comfortable with," the host said gently. Wendy nodded. "I'm ready." The interview began with small talk, then eased into deeper waters. "When did you first realize you had to walk away?" the host asked. Wendy paused. It wasn't one moment. It was years of tiny betrayals, silences louder than screams, and finally, seeing my own reflection and not recognizing the woman looking back at me. The audience was silent, riveted. "But what changed?" the host asked. Wendy smiled softly. "I stopped asking why he did it, and I started asking why I stayed." As the interview went on, Wendy spoke not of bitterness, but of rebirth. "Healing isn't glamorous," she said. "It's messy, lonely, and sometimes humiliating. But it's also the most honest journey you'll ever take." She shared a few journal entries, read aloud a quote she'd written on the day the annulment was granted. "I don't want revenge. I want restoration, and I owe it only to myself." Viewers watching from home sent messages of admiration and solidarity. The clip trended online within hours, Wendy's walk to freedom, as women from all walks of life found pieces of themselves in her voice. After the segment ended, Laura and Jordan greeted her backstage with proud smiles. "You didn't just speak," Laura said. "You lifted people." Wendy smiled, eyes glassy. "I only spoke what I wished someone had told me when I needed it most." And as they walked out of the studio into the setting sun, Wendy felt a new kind of joy, one that didn't need a person to hold it, only peace to keep it. Wendy leaned against the balcony railing of Laura's home, a soft breeze lifting her curls as evening fell over the city. Laughter drifted from inside where Laura and Jordan were setting the table for a quiet dinner. It had become a tradition now, every Friday, no pretense, just food, friendship, and a new rhythm of life. "You're awfully quiet out here," Laura said, stepping beside her with a glass of chilled hibiscus tea. Wendy smiled. "I'm just processing. Everything feels still, in a good way." Laura nudged her shoulder. "You've earned your stillness." Inside, Jordan poured wine into 3 glasses, humming to a soft tune playing from the speaker. He looked up as they entered. Perfect timing. "I made my infamous coconut rice," he said proudly. Wendy raised an eyebrow. "Infamous, huh?" Jordan grinned. "Just wait. You'll dream about it for weeks." As they sat down to eat, the conversation drifted easily, from funny stories to small victories. At one point, Jordan leaned forward, his expression sincere. "Can I say something?" Wendy looked up. "Of course." He hesitated, then said, "You've changed, but not in the way people usually mean. You haven't become someone else. You just came back to yourself." Wendy blinked, her throat tightening. "That means more than you know." Laura raised her glass. "To women who survive and then thrive." They clinked their glasses together, laughter following the toast like music. Later that night, as they cleaned up together, Jordan caught Wendy alone by the sink. You know, if you ever want help starting over, from a legal standpoint or a personal one, I'd be honored to stand beside you. She smiled warmly, not flustered, not afraid. I'm not rushing into anything, but it's nice to be seen, he nodded. Then I'll wait in the light. That evening didn't end with drama or declarations, just the quiet promise of new beginnings blooming gently. The morning sun painted gold across the horizon as Wendy stood on the porch of her new home, nestled just outside the city. It wasn't grand, but it was hers. The key turned in her hand with a satisfying click. Inside, unpacked boxes lined the hallway, and fresh paint still lingered in the air. But the silence here felt different, no longer heavy or hollow. It was peaceful, sacred. She walked barefoot across the wooden floor, stopping at the window where light filtered in like hope. She placed her journal on the window ledge and opened to the last page. With slow, deliberate strokes, she wrote, I forgave myself for staying too long. I thanked myself for leaving in time. And now I give myself permission to begin again. Later that day, Wendy took a walk through the nearby park, the wind soft against her face. Children played, couples passed by, and everything around her pulsed with life. A little girl ran past her, giggling, reminding her that joy could exist freely, even after ruin. As she sat on a bench beneath a flowering tree, she looked up to the sky, then down to her hands. No ring, no markings, just her. Whole, unfinished, but enough. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Jordan. Just checking in. No rush, just presence. She smiled and replied, Thank you. I'm learning to rest in that. Then she leaned back, eyes closed, heart open. No longer the woman who was left. No longer the woman who stayed. But the woman who rose, rewrote her story, and learned to love her own company. Chapter had closed, but the story of who she was becoming was only just beginning. Here's the Bible verse, Isaiah 61 verse 3. To bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning, and a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. They will be called oaks of righteousness, a planting of the Lord for the display of his splendor. Relevance. Wendy's story is a testament to divine restoration, rising from the ashes of betrayal with grace and strength. Her brokenness was not the end, but the beginning of something far more beautiful. In silence, God was rewriting her name, not as a victim, but as a victor clothed in dignity. Moral of the story. Never let someone's betrayal define your identity. Healing begins the moment you stop asking, why did they do it? And start asking, what do I deserve now? Your silence doesn't mean defeat. It can be the loudest roar of strength when your dignity walks in before you say a word. You owe no one your destruction to prove you were loyal. Choose peace, choose self-worth, and when the time is right, choose to begin again. That's the end of the story. What did you learn from this story? Drop your thoughts in the comment section. Leave a like and don't forget to subscribe and turn on post notification so that you'll be notified whenever we drop our next videos. Also, share this video to someone who might be interested. Thank you so much for watching.